All right, so good morning, everyone. Welcome to Thursday, although this is kind of a tricky Thursday because it's actually Friday in a clever disguise as Thursday. At least it is for you, because you don't have school tomorrow, and I do, but that's okay. So you guys get a 3-day weekend, which is nice. So yeah, there's no class tomorrow, online people. We're doing, teachers are doing professional development here in the province of British Columbia tomorrow. So you're off the hook. You can sleep in and do whatever you want. And I get to work, because that's adulting. Hashtag adulting. But anyway, enjoy your 3 days. Before we get started, I just wanted to, well, maybe I'll just say hello to people who are here. So Ayushi's here. Good morning, Ayushi. And Kevin's here. Hello, Kevin. And Hadil is here. Good morning, Hadil. And Helen's here. Good morning, Helen. And Ananda's here. Hello, Ananda. And Shania's here too. Good morning, Shania. And good morning, of course, to all of you. I just wanted to show you something very quickly. I didn't want to spend really any time on it. But of course, we were talking about genocide over the past few days, and we talked about this example of these Uyghur people who are found in kind of Western China. There were accusations that a genocide was occurring, and we read an article, I believe from Human Rights Watch, written by an advocate for these people, right? So, of course, a biased position, which is okay, right? Bias is fine. It's okay to have some bias as long as we know what it is. And clearly that person is arguing for the fact that there's a genocide happening. And I just wanted to point out, or I just wanted to mention to you that there was an article in the Globe and Mail this morning, talking about that very thing. And so I'm going to try and make this a little bit bigger. Whoop. You can read the article on your own if you want. But basically, the article explains that Canada's House of Commons, so our federal government, our parliament, has a small subcommittee that meets and discusses international human rights, and that committee has kind of ruled that, in fact, this is what seems to be happening in Western China. There seems to be a genocide occurring in Western China. The Chinese government, as you can see here, or as you might read later if you want, explains that actually no, what you're seeing there is economic stability and unity and social harmony, not genocide. And so, again, they're kind of arguing back and forth. I'll let you read the article and on your own if you are so inclined to, and make up your own mind. But I just wanted to point out that, you know, these things are currently happening in the world this minute, right? And so, yeah, this article just came out this morning, and it just discusses what the subcommittee has ruled, that they think it's a genocide, and the Chinese foreign minister here, Mr. Zhao, is explaining that no, that's actually, you're not seeing genocide, you're seeing something else. So I think I'll just leave it. I'll probably leave it there, and if you want to look into it a little more, you're certainly welcome to. Again, it's on the Globe and Mail, is a Canadian paper, a national paper, and if you're interested in reading the article, this is what it's called here. China warns not to damage relations further with, sorry, it's too big now, further with lies about Uyghur genocide. Okay, so if you're interested in reading more about that, you certainly can, but I think we've dealt with it and we'll just move on, okay? Yesterday we were talking about, oh yeah, we were talking about a few things. We were talking about kind of the turning of the tide in World War II, right? And so I mentioned that the Nazis are having quite a bit of success. Basically, when Hitler gains power in 1933-34, it's kind of up and up and up, right? He makes Germany great again. He takes back the Rhineland and Austria and Czechoslovakia, and finally he takes control of Poland, or at least half of Poland. That sort of triggers the Allies to get involved, and we have a full-on war. France is knocked out of the fight basically before the ink is dry on the declaration of war, right? So they're out of the war. And Britain is left to kind of somehow figure out how to deal with Nazi Germany. And I think probably the answer is that they don't deal with them very well, right? They don't really have the resources to hold off the Nazi advance, right? So all the way up into about early 1941, or maybe even mid-1941, it doesn't really look that good for the Allied side, right? Hitler's had a lot of success. He's taken over most of Europe. He's, now battling with the Soviet Union. Britain is kind of on the sidelines wondering, what are we going to do about this? And then, of course, as we've mentioned, two, kind of big movers and shakers, as they used to say, enter the war, right? The Soviet Union enters because, of course, Hitler attacks them, and the Americans enter because the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor. And so suddenly the balance has changed, right? The calculus of this war has changed. And so instead of the Nazis getting success after success and Britain kind of, wringing its hands in the corner, wondering what it's going to do, suddenly there's two major powers who are in the fight now, and the things are going to shift, right? And so we've talked about Stalingrad yesterday, where the Nazis are trying to take the city in order to cut communication and cut supplies from the Allies to the Soviet Union. Also will serve as a forward base for a later invasion. But of course, it doesn't go very well for the Nazis. Some of their soldiers are surrounded. They can't supply them, and they're forced to surrender, right, for the first time in a few years. So maybe a demoralizing defeat for the Nazis, but it's going to be the first of many for them as the war kind of winds down, right? So we talked about that. We talked about what happens in North Africa, right, where the Nazis are in North Africa, perhaps for some resources, but also to guard against the soft underbelly of Europe, right? So we said that when the Nazis took over France, they chose to occupy the north part of France because that's what would protect them from a British invasion, right? And so a little bit later, once the Allies take over Northern Europe, the Nazis take over all of France, right? Because now they have to guard against invasions from the south as well. And so that'll spread the Nazis a little bit more thinly. But again, the Nazis will be defeated here as well, right? And Montgomery will push Rommel, the Desert Fox. Do you think he told women that when he tried to pick them up in bars? He's like, they call me the Desert Fox. Do you think that helped him? Yeah, he probably didn't have time to do it. You don't know. Even if he did, they'll be like, okay, you're the Desert Fox, and what are you doing here? He's a war hero. I mean, he's allowed to have a little bit of free time, isn't he? Like a night out now and again. You know what happened to him in the end. I do know what happened to him in the end. What happened to him in the end? He got shot by a death squad. They executed him. They did, but that wasn't the official story, right? Yeah, no. Was it related to the Valkyrie thing? I'm not too the Operation Valkyrie. I don't know too much about the plan or the Tom Cruise movie, the least believable German of all time. He shouldn't do movies where he plays someone who's not American, because his accents are really bad. Accents are not a talent of his. Jumping out of planes at 40,000 feet, he's great at that, but accents are not his thing. But anyway, I don't know too much about Operation Valkyrie. The story I heard about Rommel was that he was defeated and he went back to Germany. Hitler was pretty displeased with his failure, but Rommel was kind of a war hero to the Germans, and so executing him would have looked bad. And so they did execute him, but I think the story was, or they allowed him to commit suicide. So they allowed him to have a cyanide pill or something. And so he did die. The state did execute him, but that wasn't the story that the German public heard, because the German public had a lot of respect for him. That was the story I heard anyway. I'm not sure if that's 100% accurate. I know that Yeah, I think it was. I think it was like they allowed him to sort of commit suicide in a painless fashion, or they. But it was not a choice. It was it was not his choice. Right. So okay. So the Nazis are defeated at Stalingrad. They're defeated at El Alamein in North Africa, which I think is in Libya, but don't quote me on that. What's that? Is it in Egypt? Oh, okay. In Western Egypt. Sorry about that. What's that? Oh, it's on the map? Okay, good. Yeah, and so Winston Churchill says here, before Alamein, we never had a victory. After Alamein, we never had a defeat. Right. So again, there's kind of a TSN turning point here, if you will, where the tide turns, right? And so the Allies are now on the attack. They are armed. They have power behind them, and they are moving forward, right? And Hitler, for the first time, is kind of spread pretty thin, right? He's fighting on a bunch of different fronts. He's fighting 3 powerful allies. And again, Germany just doesn't have the resources to fight all 3 of these countries at the same time, right? It's too much. And so again, the Allies will start to push the Nazis back into German borders, and then, will prepare to move into Germany itself. And so we talked about a few meetings that the Allies have, right? So once the US and Britain and the Soviet Union are kind of allied and working together, they have a few meetings to decide strategy and what they should do. And we mentioned here at Casablanca, in Morocco, they decide that they will only accept an unconditional surrender from Germany, right? There's not going to be any ceasefire and negotiations or anything like that. Germany is going to have to unconditionally give up, right? What does unconditionally mean?
You give up, you say nothing about it, just give it up.
You just give it up? You have no choice? Yeah, and there's...
You get nothing out of it, we get it.
Yeah, unconditional is like no conditions, right? So it's like, it's not going to be Germany saying, okay, we give up as long as you promise not to do this, and as long as you promise to give us this and this, then we'll give up. That's a conditional surrender, right? They're saying unconditional. You don't get anything, you just give up and we will do what we want, right? So that's what the plan is according to the Allies. They meet in Tehran, of course, we talked about, and they agree to open this second front in France, right? And we'll talk about that briefly today. They meet in Moscow. Of course, Roosevelt isn't there because there's a presidential election on, as there currently is. And so Churchill and Stalin decide on these kind of spheres of influence, right? And so early on, it becomes clear to at least Churchill, maybe not Roosevelt so much, becomes clear that when the war is over and the Nazis are defeated, they were going to have to do something with these liberated countries in Europe. And it was basically the same question as they had at the end of the Treaty of Versailles at the end of World War I, right? What do we do now with Europe, right? And so it's the same question that comes up. What are we going to do with Europe, right? And so here we can see that the West, Churchill and Roosevelt, probably want to create an Eastern Europe with a bunch of democracies, and they all rule themselves and everybody stays out of their business. But of course, that's not the plan that Joseph Stalin has at all. Stalin is planning to control these countries like a puppeteer, right? And sort of make them do what he wants. And he also wants, and we'll get to this a bit later, he also wants a buffer between the West, right? He doesn't want communist Soviet Russia to be right next door to Western liberal democracies, right? He wants a bit of a cushion, a bit of a buffer zone, right? And so the Eastern European countries are going to be that for him. They're going to be a bit of a cushion between him and the West, right? And so Stalin's pretty invested in that idea from the very beginning, and it seems like that's just how it's going to be, right? And Churchill recognizes that, and so they start talking about spheres of influence in Central and Eastern Europe, right? And so a sphere of influence. So a sphere, we said yesterday, is kind of a circle-ish type thing, and of influence means that you have influence over. And so it depends. It depends if it's influence or control, right? And so in the West, it's going to be influence, right? And so Great Britain, but mostly the U.S. is going to support Western Europe and arm them and pour money into them and help them sort of get back on their feet in a democratic fashion.
Stalin did that too. Not that common.
Well, yeah, and so Stalin's going to do that too, but his influence is going to be much more like direct control. And so we'll see that the governments in Eastern Europe that are friendly to him, you know, get to exist as long as they do what he says. The governments that don't do what he says, what's that?
Don't get this.
Well, yeah, the government leaders quickly find themselves dead, and Stalin puts people in who will listen to him. And so in Eastern Europe, it will be much more a sphere of kind of direct control. In the West, it'll be a sphere of, you know, influence and assistance and stuff like that. Yeah. So that kind of gets decided there. And then at Yalta, which we, where did we say that was? Oh, Ukraine. We said it was in Ukraine? Yeah, so at Yalta they meet, and again they decide on some borders, right? Particularly the idea that Germany is going to be split in half, which is kind of a strange agreement. But again, as the war kind of winds on, we see that these allies or frenemies become less friends and more enemies, right? And so by the time the Nazis are defeated, Stalin isn't going to cooperate with the Allies at all. And so what they wind up agreeing to is a Germany split in half, with one side in the Soviet sphere and one side in the Western sphere. And the capital of Berlin, which is in East Germany, is going to be split into 4 administrative districts, right? One for France and one for Britain and one for the US and one for the Soviet Union. So that's even more weird. But that's what's going to happen. And that's agreed to at Yalta. Okay, so we said that the Allies agreed to open that second front in France, and finally they do in June of 1944. And so you will often see the Normandy landings kind of played out in film. If you've ever seen Saving Private Ryan, anyone seen that one? Yeah, Saving Private Ryan has a fantastic sequence. Is it the beginning of the movie, I think?
Yes, the beginning of the event.
Yeah, so the beginning of Saving Private Ryan, and you can see this on YouTube. I won't show it in here because it's kind of gory. But they have a great sequence where it really gives you an idea of what it is like to land at Normandy. And so these soldiers are coming into the beach in these kind of amphibious vehicles. They have to sort of, the vehicles kind of hit the beach, and you have to run through, I don't know, 50 feet of water before you get to the beach. And then you try to make your way inland. But of course, the Nazis are machine gunning everyone as they try to gain the beach. And so it's a pretty bloody, awful invasion. And so the US is there, and Britain is there, and Canada is there too. And so, yay, Canada. And so you may not recognize the Canadian flag, though, at that point. It's that red one. But the Canadian flag, as you know it now, actually hadn't been invented yet. And so we were still fighting under that flag until, I think, 1964 is when we get our real flag. I don't like that one at all. That one's horrible. But yeah, we don't have our current flag yet. But that's us at Juno Beach. And so every beach kind of has a code name. There's Omaha and Juno and a couple of others which I've forgotten. And so, yeah, the Allies land here, right? And this is all occupied territory, but it's the first step. If they can gain the beach and they can hold it, then they can start to push the Nazis back out of France and back into Germany. And of course, that's exactly what happens, but it's a slow, bloody process, and a lot of soldiers die trying to gain that beach and hold it, because again, the Nazis are just sitting there on the beach, brrr, just sort of machine gunning people down. What's that?
You mean the soldiers were
Mm-hmm. That's true. The Nazis kind of misjudged where and when the Allies would try to make a landing, right? So
They did that to the Nazis. They
They-
planned a whole other operation
mm,
with a lot of fake stuff. The German air reconnaissance saw it, and they thought it's okay, they're gonna land here. They fortified there, but the Allies never showed up.
it's true, yeah. So there, and as with most things in history, there's more to it, right? And so, yeah, there's this kind of fake operation that is planned to sort of throw the Nazis off the trail. If you dig into this a little deeper, you'll probably read or come across the idea that these landings didn't particularly go very well. The coordination was not good. They were kind of late getting started, and so some of these guys were hitting the beach. They were supposed to hit the beach while it was still dark, but they actually wound up hitting the beach after the sun had come up, so it was already light. And so, of course, it's much easier to shoot people when you can see them, right? So that doesn't go very well for them. They were supposed to have air support, which they didn't have. And so, the plan doesn't really go perfectly, but it does work. And the Allies are successful, and they are able to hold the beach and use that as kind of a sort of a starting place to push the Nazis back into France, and then eventually back into Germany. But it goes pretty quickly after that, right? So the Allies land at Normandy on the coast of northern France. They land in 1944 in June, and then by kind of the end of August, they've liberated most of North France. So it actually, once they're able to establish a beachhead, as they say, once they're able to do that, things actually move pretty quick, and they're able to bring across more troops and land them safely, and then use them to push the Nazis back. And so, again, by the end of 1944, northern France is kind of retaken by the Allies. And then, as you can see, this isn't a great map, but as you can see, the Allied forces start to push the Nazis back within German borders. Eventually, the Soviets will actually enter Berlin, right? So Berlin is the capital of Nazi Germany, and it's actually the Soviets who managed to get in there first. This is where our good friend Hitler exits the story, right? So once the Soviet Union is kind of rolling into Berlin, the writing is on the wall, right? It looks like it's pretty much over at this point. And so Hitler commits suicide, him and his wife. And I think he marries his wife just shortly before.
He marries her, then they shoot each other.
Yeah, he marries her, and then they commit suicide. So, talk about a fear of commitment, right? Like, you couldn't have married her earlier. But anyway, that's an aside. So, as you can see here, Mussolini had been executed 2 days before, and again, not in a friendly way, right? Like, he was captured by resistance fighters, and I think they hung him in the street. And so, and they stabbed him while he was being hung. So Mussolini didn't have a very good death, right? And so Hitler was probably aware of that, and he probably wasn't too interested in being captured by the Allies, right? And so he commits suicide with his former girlfriend, now wife, right, Eva Braun, in a bunker, and he gives orders to his next in command: don't give up the fight. Everything for the fatherland. Keep fighting until the last German, right? And so he gives those orders. He commits suicide bravely, or not, I don't know. And then he's gone. His next in command, whose name I've forgotten now, pretty quickly realizes that this is ridiculous advice, and he's not going to fight to the last German. He knows that it's all over. And so basically, as soon as Hitler is dead, he goes to the Allies and says, okay, we're out. So that doesn't happen. Hitler's final instructions are not followed because, again, it's over. It's all over at this point. Some people have argued that Hitler doesn't die, right? That he didn't commit suicide and that he, somehow escaped, only to be killed later on Supernatural, right? But in fact, we seem to have some evidence that he actually did die. And so this is actually very recent, right, as of April 2018. But there were, as you can see here, the publication of Memoirs of a Russian Interpreter says that he'd actually been given some of the remains of Hitler. He'd been given his teeth. And so those teeth were kind of taken back to Russia and stayed, I guess, in some family's keeping for, no, like they were given to this interpreter. And so the teeth kind of found their way back into the hands of academics, and they checked those teeth against Hitler's dental records, and they seem to be his. So we actually have Hitler's teeth. Want to see them? Well, the dental records and teeth. You want to see the teeth?
Sure.
Okay. So apparently this is what's left of Hitler. And so as you can kind of see, maybe this photo could be a little bit larger, but you can see we're looking at, I think we're looking at some of the teeth from the upper part, and then we're seeing a jawbone there. So if you look in the lower right, I think that's this part of his mandible or jawbone. And so you can see he's had a lot of dental work, right? And at the time, a lot of the dental work they did was with metal, right? They used gold or something like that. And so you can see his teeth are actually not in great condition. I don't know if he brushed very much or what it was. But yeah, so you can see he's got kind of a bridge there. You can see a bunch of kind of metal teeth that span the distance between real teeth because he lost those original ones. So lots of metal teeth, which is kind of gross, but I think that's what dentistry was in the early 1900s. And so apparently, if you want to believe a conspiracy theory that he's not dead and that he escaped, here is some evidence that in fact he did not. And well, it depends, right? So how okay, let's do a bit of critical thinking here, right? So what's the conclusion here? The conclusion is that Hitler is dead, and the proof of that is that we have his physical remains, right?
So is this part, yeah, sure, he's definitely dead now. Even if he did it right then, but that is not solid proof. Like, there's the teeth, but they don't prove that it was some guys. There was one specific person. Now in our age, yeah, you can match the DNA and voila, you're done. It's him. But they didn't have that. And they could have been the teeth of any other person.
Okay, so how do we know? So you say there's no DNA evidence at this point, right? No, there is not. So DNA hasn't been invented yet. So, or the analysis of it hasn't been invented. So how can we be sure that these teeth belong to Hitler? What's that? His body was burned afterwards. And so he died. They burned both of their bodies. The Soviet soldiers found the remains, right? Found his remains. These were taken by Soviet soldiers or whatever. They found their way into the hands of a Russian interpreter who hung on to them for a long time. And then eventually they found their way to academics who studied them. And so they took these teeth, they compared them to the dental records we have from the time, primary sources, by the way. What's that? I think they're in, I don't know if they are with the academics. I don't know who has them at the moment. But how can we be sure? The teeth are real, right? So let's give a, so let's just pretend that these are real teeth, okay? They're not imaginary teeth. They're not CGI. They're real teeth. How do we know? Right now. Maybe we can't know for absolute certain, but can we be reasonably confident? How do we know that they're his in the first place?
They were found by soldiers we don't know who were, and they were given to an interpreter who we don't know who was, and then they found themselves in the hands of academics who don't know who they were, and now we don't know where they are.
We know who the interpreter was, because it was published. The interpreter published their memoirs, right? So they wrote a book saying, you know, my time in World War II with the Soviet Army, right? So we know who the person is, and we know the circumstances under which they came to acquire these teeth.
From a bunch of soldiers.
Yeah, from a bunch of soldiers. Separately, we have Hitler's dental records, right? Primary sources from the time of the Nazis that we have been able to get our hands on. So, the teeth are real, and the only thing we have to make sure is we have to know the provenance, is the fancy word, of the dental records, right? Are they legitimate? Are they accurate? Is it likely that they are forged or misleading in some way?
Okay, so say they are definitely right. They're true. They're not forged. They're not fake. They're nothing like that. So
Mm-hmm.
can or cannot two people have the same dental record, have the same problems, and their teeth be fixed the same way?
I don't know. What do you think?
They can. So these could be the teeth of a random Berlin
I would-
citizen.
I would bet that no two people's teeth are quite the same. I would bet that none of them are quite the same, especially if you have dental work done. Has anyone here had dental work done? Even cavities filled? You've never had anything done to your teeth? No cavities? Nothing? Your teeth are all perfect?
We're all just shy.
What's that?
We're all just shy.
We're all just shy? Okay. So everyone's had a little bit of work done to their teeth, right? Hitler's had a lot of work done to his teeth, right? All kinds of stuff. But even if you look at just that, you're going to find that all of our cavities are a little bit different, right? They're all in different spots. Some of us have different amounts of teeth, right? Does anyone have their wisdom teeth? The teeth that come in the back? Yeah? How many do you have? You two? Just the bottom ones?
I'm not sure about the top.
They haven't come in yet? Okay. So just the bottom ones? B? Bottom ones? Bottom? No top? Interesting. Aliana? Just the bottom ones? No top ones? Those teeth that come in way in the back? 2 of them? 4 of them? 3 of them? 2 of them? On the top or the bottom? On the bottom? Everyone's on the bottom. What's going on? Ashley? Just the bottom ones? Man, what's going on here? And Rose, do you have those teeth? Yeah? 4 or 2? Just 1? Okay. Yeah, so this is just one example, okay? So I'm drawing on my anthropology background here. Those teeth, wisdom teeth or third molars, whatever you call them, I think they're called tertiary molars sometimes too. They are they're quite variable in humans at the moment. And so when they occur, some people have all 4, some people have 2, some people have 3, some people have none, right? And so I think what's happening is they're in the process of kind of evolving away because we don't eat the sort of tough foods that we used to thousands of years ago, right? We're all eating Pringles and yogurt and stuff like that. Highly processed food. You don't need giant teeth to chew those. And so those are disappearing. And so once upon a time, everyone had 4 of them. My mom had 4. I only had 2, so I only had the top ones. But I couldn't brush them very well, and they got cavities in them, so I had them pulled. So I actually used to have them, but now I don't. I have a few cavities that I've had filled because, I went out trick-or-treating for Halloween when I was a kid too, so I got cavities. I've had a couple of cavities filled. I broke my front tooth when I was working at Mr. Lube when I was 16. And so this front tooth, I broke off the bottom part of it. And so what you see right there is a crown. It's a covering, so it's fake. I also have a tooth in the back that actually has like cracked in half and has been covered on top. And so that's kind of weird too. So all of those things are weird, right? And do you think anyone has that exact pattern of dental work that I have?
Probably someone for like 7 billion people.
Yeah, that has all of the same things that I have in exactly the same tooth? Unlikely, right? Not to mention that my teeth themselves are unique, right? Not all teeth are the same. There's a thing called, sorry, this is a total tangent, but we're in it now. There's a thing that that people have on their molars called Carabelli's cusp, okay? And so it's just one feature of one tooth. And so if you feel it, use your tongue and feel around the top of your teeth. And what you're feeling for is one of the molars on the inside, and it's the first one. So your first molar, you're feeling on the inside, and it is on the back corner. And so some of you might feel like a little point. So just on the corner of that tooth, like it has a little point coming down. Some of you may have it and some of you may not, okay? And so that's just that's a genetic trait. Some people have this little cusp, this little point on the tooth. Some people don't. It doesn't make much of a difference. It's just a genetically inherited thing. I happen to have it. I can feel it right there, but not everyone has that, right? So even if you don't look at my dental work, there are things about my teeth that I don't share with everyone else. Not to mention that all teeth grow a little bit different, right? And
Back to the Hitler thing, the only thing that is on this dental record is what the people did to his teeth, right? What his dentist did. So what I'm saying, we don't have a picture of his teeth. We don't know how his teeth look like. We don't know how his teeth look like in the first place. So it may be just a person who had the same kind of dental work.
right. How sure? Okay, so if we have that, so if you were looking at these teeth, right, and you can clearly see, all the dental work, you can see the cavities that were filled, you can see the teeth that are kind of crowned, you can see the teeth that are missing and the bridge they put across. If you saw all that and you saw the dental records that say, oh, okay, here's the records of all of that work, how certain do you think you can be that these are his teeth, percentage-wise? Huh? 50-50? That's pretty bad. They may or may not be, right? What do you think? 97? That's very precise. 75? Yeah. I don't know. I think this is reasonably good evidence. The other thing we should probably keep in mind is that dental work was probably not quite so standardized at the time, right? And so the type of dental work you would get done in one place would not be exactly the same as you had done in another. So it's very possible that, I don't know, I think this is pretty good evidence. You may disbelieve it if you want, right? And again, you should probably read, if you're really curious, you should probably read the whole paper where they talk about it. But I think this is pretty good evidence that he died there, and this is a piece of him, right? I don't know. Right. So yeah. So here's a few details from the study. And so the lead author here says, our study proves that Hitler died in 1945. The teeth are authentic. There is no possible doubt. So the author of this study seems to be fairly comfortable, even if you're less confident. He seems quite confident. Yes, so he did not flee to Argentina in a submarine or is living in a hidden base in Antarctica or whatever the other conspiracy theories that exist. Yeah, he's dead. Right, so again, Hitler gave orders to his next in command. I think that's who it was, Alfred Joel, or Joel, I guess it is. Alfred Joel. He gives him orders to fight to the last German, never surrender, everything for the fatherland. And then Hitler commits suicide, and Alfred says, yeah, we're not doing that. it's all over here. So again, they contact the Allies, and Germany surrenders unconditionally as of May 7th, 1945. So, and that's kind of it. We said that this is kind of the entering of a new phase, right, in terms of world power, world balance of power, right? Before we had Western Europe as the center of global power, right? We had Britain and France, and to some lesser extent Spain and Portugal, and the Netherlands as kind of sort of industrial powers, colonial powers. But that period is kind of ended, right? And so all of those countries are becoming or have become second-rate powers. And at the end of World War II, it's really the USSR and the USA that emerge as the global superpowers. We have a bipolar world, not bipolar that way, but two poles, right? We have two centers of power. Okay, you want to take a quick break? Quick break, we'll come back, and then I have a video to show you that we can talk about. It might be, but let's do it anyway. Okay, quick break, then I have a video to show you that's a little interesting, I think. I hope. What's it about? You'll find out. So, because we're kind of headed into a long weekend here, we'll kind of take a pause. We'll do something just a little different, but connected to what we've been talking about. One of the things that, I think one of the themes that's kind of running through this whole Nazi, World War II, genocide, fascism thing is, you know, how do these things happen and how can we stop them from happening again, right? I think that's one of the threads that is moving through this point in history, right? And so, again, with fascism, we tried to talk about why Hitler came to power in the first place and how these things happen. We saw in that video of the bell, there was an art exhibition saying, Hitler, how did it happen, right? This is a question people want to know, right? And similar with the genocide thing, we talked about the stages of genocide, and then we identified a genocide that might be happening right now as we speak, right? And so how can we kind of understand these things in the past so that we can, you know, get an early warning of them in the present and maybe interrupt them and keep horrible things from happening over and over and over again, right? And so to that end, I wanted to talk a little bit about, or have this guy talk to us. Has anyone heard of this guy, Yuval Noah Harari? Yuval Noah Harari. Oh, okay. I was going to say he's never heard of you either, so it's okay. Yeah, so Yuval is a historian here from University of Jerusalem. He's quite popular because he's written 3 best-selling books, actually. So Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind, which I've read twice, I think. It's very, very good. Homo Deus, Homo Deus, I have not read yet, but I would like to. And Lessons for the 21st Century, again, I'd like to read that too, if only I had time to read. But Sapiens was great. I read it a couple times. I use parts of that book in some of my courses, so thanks, Yuval. I appreciate that. But what I wanted to do today is watch a TED Talk that Yuval Noah Harari gave in Vancouver a couple years ago. Sort of in Vancouver, anyway. You'll see what I mean. And his TED Talk was called this, Why Fascism is So Tempting and How Your Data Could Power It. So he's going to talk in this TED Talk, he's going to talk a little bit about fascism, and we kind of know what fascism is, or at least I hope we do at this point. He's going to talk a little bit about nationalism, and he's going to talk about how fascists kind of come to power, and can fascism appear again in the modern world, right? And so again, I think that's a reasonable question to ask now, especially because a little bit earlier this term I asked you the question, is the American president a fascist? Which seems like a wild and ridiculous question, but actually at this point it's a legitimate question, right? It seems like a question you would never ask or should never have to ask, but indeed we have found ourselves asking it, right? And so again, the idea of fascism appearing in Western democracy is not an outlandish one, but Yuval Noah Harari has some ideas about how such a thing could happen, and is it actually happening already? It's just that we don't see it because it's not happening the same way as it did in Italy or in Nazi Germany, okay? So what I want to do here is I want to watch the TED Talk, and then basically what I want you to do is try and figure out what his argument is. So this is back to our critical thinking stuff, right? So what is his conclusion? What is Yuval what is he asking us to believe? And then as good critical thinkers, we'll ask for premises, right? We'll try to figure out why should we believe this, Yuval? What are your supporting ideas that lead us to believe that your conclusion is true or correct or accurate? Okay? So if you're online, I have put the link to this video in Microsoft Teams, and so you should see it there. And so what we'll do is we will watch the video, try to figure out Yuval's conclusion and premises, try to figure out his argument, and then we'll come back here and we'll talk about it, okay? So online people, I'm going to set you free to do that. The link is in Microsoft Teams in the History 12 team channel. And we'll see you back here after the video, okay? So what did you think of what Yuval said?
Well, all seen
Huh?
what we saw.
Yeah. What do you all think of Yuval? Eh? Eh? No? Okay. Um, let's. What is he trying to tell us? Let's try to search for his argument here. What is Yuval Noah Harari's conclusion here? What does he want us to believe? He said a lot of things. What does he want us to believe? Okay, so he talks a little bit about fascism and nationalism and the difference between them. What's nationalism to him?
Love your country, feel obligated about your country.
Yeah, so he says that we said that nationalism is a group of people, right, who feel that they are one, right? And so nationalism also implies that you have a duty to your nation, right? You have a duty to your country. You owe things to it, right? And maybe you love it a little bit too. And there's a bit of patriotism mixed in there. I know we separated those two things out. Yuval is kind of weaving them together a little bit. But what's fascism by his definition? You feel superior, but also it has to do with that. So nationalism is like, I belong to my nation, I love my nation, I have obligations to my nation. But what is fascism? What's that? Right, I have exclusive obligations to my nation, right? The nation comes first. And so he says, in a liberal democracy, I have obligations to all kinds of things, right? To my family, to my profession as a teacher and an academic, which he is, to my neighborhood, to my place of work, right? I have all of these different obligations, right? These things, but fascism says no. None of that matters. Your only obligation is to the state, right? And so how do we decide what to do? How do we decide what to teach? How do we decide what's right and wrong? It depends what's good for the nation, right? If it's good for the nation, then it must be good. The end, right? And so he says other obligations like family or profession or, truth, or beauty or common, ethics and morality, none of those mean anything anymore because the only thing that matters is what is good for the nation, right? What else? What are some of the other things he says? So, yep, go ahead.
He argued that fascism and dictatorship can rise again, but in different forms.
Right. So, sorry, I'll let you go in a second. So he's saying that, we had a problem with fascism and dictatorships in the 1920s and 30s, but those could appear again, just not in the same way, right? We're obviously not living in the 1930s anymore. Things are really different. This could happen again, but differently. And so, sorry, can I let you continue?
He said that they're going to be like technological data controlling and genetics.
Okay, so clearly, this is an obvious statement, but of course technology is different than it was 100 years ago, right? And so how does technology play into this rise of fascism and dictatorships? How can technology be used?
So he said that technology can be used to gather information and then mixing it up with some organic stuff, I think he said. You could create an algorithm that could take what you do and how to manipulate your feelings. And then dictatorships or fascists would use that to manipulate your feelings and get you to their side.
What is an algorithm? Do you know what that is?
Yeah.
What is it?
It's like the, explain it. Every device, every computer thing we have, it has an algorithm. When you click that close button on your screen, that's an algorithm that needs
Right. So an algorithm is kind of a sequence for doing something, right? Or so you want to accomplish a certain thing. There's a certain manner in which that happens, right? So all electronic devices work on algorithms that teach it how to do things, right? A sequence of steps, right? And so here we have algorithms doing all kinds of things for us all day long, right? But how is that useful to a potential dictator or fascist? How it's useful? How is it useful?
You can process the information and then help manipulating your feelings, and then they'll get you to the side of the fascist or dictator.
Okay, so there's two things. There's the processing of information, and then, as Yuval says, there's the hacking of our feelings, right? Or the manipulation of our feelings. Let's start with the processing thing. What did that? How did he explain that to us? How is information processing useful to a dictator or a fascist? Yes, and I think that's more the emotional thing. So I'll press pause on that, and we'll come back to it. But the information processing, in a democracy, there's lots of people who have power, right? So the power is with the people, and so here in Canada, we've got the federal government, we've got provincial governments, we've got municipal governments, we've got different committees all over the place. So there's lots of different people making lots of different decisions, right? But in a dictatorship, whether it's fascism or communism, you have everything being decided in one room, right? You're either in Communist Party headquarters, or you're in the Führer's office, or you're in Mussolini's office, and everything comes from there. And so Yuval is saying the problem is that in the 1920s, there's no way to handle all the information, right? You can't run an entire country from one room, right? There's too much information, there's too many people, there's too many decisions. You just cannot deal with that amount of information in one room in 1920. It's impossible. And so dictators struggle to control their countries from a single place because you just cannot collect and process that amount of information. And that's definitely the case in the Soviet Union, as we'll find out. You just cannot run all of the Soviet Union from one room. It's too complicated, and there's just no way to process the information. But flash forward 100 years, when we have everybody has a computer in their pocket, on their desk, right? There's computers everywhere, and we're starting to develop AI, right? We're starting to develop computer programs that can write themselves, right? That can figure out how to do things on their own. You just tell them what you want them to figure out, and they will find a way. And so Yuval is saying now that limitation in 1920 is gone, right? You conceivably could run a country the size of the Soviet Union from one room because the computers are powerful enough to process all of the data in the entire country, and it can come up with solutions as well, right? It can actually comb through all of the information and tell you this is what's happening and this is what you should do about it, right? And so now the thing that held dictators back 100 years ago, that limitation is gone, right? People can actually, an entire country could be controlled from a single point because we have the technology to process that information, right? What did he say about, so Amanda, tell me more about the knowing you better than you know yourself. Hmm.
You can kind of get an impression of your views, I guess, your interests.
Yeah, and are our computers and apps already doing this? Sure, right? Our computers are learning who we are all the time. What's probably the most basic example of this? Instagram Explorer? Yeah, so based on the things, based on the sort of Instagram profiles that you follow, it will suggest others. It's figuring out who and what you like and making suggestions. What else? Web history, right? So all of the sites that you visit, everything you click is logged somewhere, right? Mostly either on your computer or with your internet service provider. Google, how's Google trying to figure you out? Right, right. So Google is very good at trying to give you search results. If you type in something, it will try to figure out what you want and give it to you. What else? YouTube, yeah. How does YouTube do it?
When you watch specific people on your feed, they're just going to show whatever is the same.
Right. So YouTube will try to figure you out. It will see what videos you watch, and then it will suggest videos that it thinks are similar. What else? Somebody say cookies. Not chocolate chip cookies. How do cookies work?
Is it the one on the website?
What's that?
Is it the one on the website where you accept it?
Yeah, well, now they have to offer that. But so cookies are a little file that websites dump into your computer, and it remembers things that you look at, right? So if you go shoe shopping on the internet, right, and you look at a bunch of shoes, what happens in terms of the ads for other websites? Suddenly there's shoes everywhere, right? There's shoes popping up all over your Facebook feed and, you know, in Google searches and everywhere, right? There's suddenly shoe ads everywhere. And that's cookies, right? So the website that you're shopping for your shoes at dumps a little file into your computer saying, well, I don't know what the file says, but it says shoes, right? And so the next thing you know, those shoes are showing up everywhere, right? They're showing you those things. So the computer's learning what you like, and it's trying to give you more of that, right? How else are computers getting to know you? Anyone have an Apple Watch? Apple Watch? No? Some people have Apple Watches, right? Probably millions and millions of people strapped to their wrist all day. All of their communications come through there, their music comes through there, their heart rate and their VO2 max. VO2 max is like your maximum, the maximum amount of oxygen in your blood. There's now a sensor for that on the new Apple Watch has a VO2 max sensor. I don't know how accurate it is, but it's there. So not only are computers trying to figure out what you like and what you don't like, but they can actually measure your body, right? Not this watch. They can measure your body, right? They can tell if your heart rate is fast or slow. They can tell what your body temperature is. They can tell how much oxygen is in your blood. Does this sound creepy and weird and dangerous to you? Of what? Of Sky? Yeah. So how far away from are we, so I can't say it. Let's say you're reading a news story on, you know, the Globe and Mail about Uyghurs in China. Let's say you're reading the story, and is my phone watching me and listening to me? Definitely is, right? It's got a camera. I don't know what the camera's doing. I assume it's not watching me, but it might be. It's got a camera, so it's looking at me, and it's listening to me as well, because I know that when I talk about things, they show up, right? My girlfriend and I were talking about this restaurant Savio Volpe the other day, and I don't know where my phone was. It was nowhere near us, but suddenly Savio Volpe came up in my Instagram feed, right? So my phone is listening to me, and it's watching me, right? So how far away from me are we from me reading a story about Uyghurs in China? My phone is watching me, It's listening to me. I've got my Apple Watch on, so it's measuring my heart rate and my VO2 max. How far are we from being able to, from the government, being able to tell how you feel when you read a story about the government? Science fiction? Not really, right? What's keeping us protected? Well, data privacy laws are keeping us protected, right? But we are not very far away from, again, the government being able to know how you feel about everything, right? And so, again, you read a story or you hear something about something the government has done, the government knows whether you like it or whether you don't, right?
Could also be a good thing. I know, like, how.
Ooh.
But imagine the same thing that is used to measure your heart rate and check you is also used to check terrorists.
How do fascists feel about enemies of the state?
Not good.
Not good. What happens to enemies of the state?
Well, they either disappear or disappear and die.
They are removed, right? Because there's no room for people who are enemies of the state. Is it possible that somebody might interpret anger towards, a story about the Canadian government? Can I be an enemy of the state? Just for reading a story about Justin Trudeau and my Apple Watch is registering that I'm really angry at what I'm reading, right? So this is what Yuval's kind of saying, right? The technology is here and the power is here for the government to actually know what you like, know what you don't, show you the things that you like, show you the things that you don't like in order to maybe inspire your fear or hatred, and it knows how you feel about all of these things, or at least it's possible. And it can know how you feel even if you hide it, right? So we said in Nazi Germany, to oppose the Nazis was super dangerous, right? But you could oppose them in here, right? You could say, I don't agree with any of this. I don't like Adolf Hitler. He's a monster. This is totally awful, right? But of course, as long as you keep it in here, you're safe, right? But now we have the technology where it won't matter, right? It won't matter if you keep it in there because it's possible for the government to know, right? And to really know how you feel. And it won't matter if I read the story about Trudeau and I say, I love Justin Trudeau. He's so great. He's such a great leader. And he's so dreamy. It doesn't matter if I say that because the technology will know that I'm lying. And the technology will know how I really feel. And again, is that dangerous for someone who might want absolute power? Yeah, super dangerous, right? And again, is the technology already here? More or less, right? It doesn't quite work that way, and the government doesn't have control of it, but the technology exists, right? We can monitor people's bodies, we can monitor people's reaction, we can monitor people's web activity. All of those things already exist, and the only thing standing between the misuse of it are privacy laws, right? Laws that keep people's data private and safe, right? This is the last thing I'll say because we're almost out of time, but we'll have to deal with this a little on Monday. Here in Canada, we do have privacy laws, and so all of the websites and things that you go to are stored by your internet service provider, right? So TELUS or Rogers or Freedom or whoever you're with has a record of every website you go to, every text message you send, every call you make. They have all of that. But the government can't have it, okay? Because it's protected by privacy laws. So the government cannot go to TELUS and say, hey, we want all of Beatrice's phone, internet, message, records, we want them all. TELUS doesn't have to give them over. Unless it's a criminal investigation with a subpoena. But even then, it's difficult to get. But imagine that law not existing. Imagine the government just wanting your records, just 'cause, right? Does that make you feel very secure? No, right? All of a sudden, everything you say and do and think and feel and read can all be read by the government. And with the information processing that they have, they can actually do something with that, right? They can actually filter that information and know perhaps who's a threat, right? And this is the last thing I'll say, I promise. We almost see that happening in Captain America: Winter Soldier, right? Remember his, what's the Zola? Professor Zola's algorithm does exactly that. It figures out who's a threat to the state, and then all of those airships were going to go into the air and take all of those targets out. That's exactly what that was in the movie. That was information and data processing, identifying people who were threats to the state, and all of those gunships were going to take them out. But of course, those people were threats to Hydra, right? But still, that's exactly what that was. The movie used that idea in a fictional sense. But again, it's not so fictional, right? The technology exists and it can be misused. Okay, that's all I'll say because we're out of time. We're going to come back to that. Ayushi, I'll come back to your comment on Monday too, okay? So I'm sorry I didn't get to that. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a nice long weekend. There's no class tomorrow, so you can relax. I will see you. Bye-bye.